Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by one of the South Bend Cubs broadcasters, Brendan King. BK, how's it going, buddy?
Greg, it is an honor to always be on the program. That was a sick intro. We did not have that last time I was on the show, so clearly we're moving up in the world. I love it.
I gotta step the game up, dude. I gotta step the game up. I've been rocking that a little bit. I've been making tweaks here and there throughout every week, throughout the season. Honestly, we're sitting here. This is the end of the first season, towards the end of the first season, I guess, of the Cubs on Deck podcast. Obviously, I had Growing Cubs before this, but one full season of baseball in, pretty much. That's why you're on the show. Today we're recapping the South Bend Cubs season, which was a blast as always to have you and Max on the calls. But we're gonna spend a decent amount of time here recapping the South Bend Cubs. And there's a couple quick little notes, news and notes type things that we need to get into first before that. But dude, like how you been? What's going on, dude?
Brother, everything's good. First of all, I want to get this in. Congratulations on 1 year. I know you texted me about this about a year ago, and I know you and Jimmy did the show great together, and then you kind of had the little spin-off in your own direction, and I know the show has been popping, and you've had great guests. So congratulations to you, number one. Number two, everything's great. Had an awesome season, as you said. I think everybody would have liked maybe to win a couple more ball games, but that's ball, and can't complain too much that just to my left here, I got 2 championship rings. It's been a pretty good run. Yeah, I mean, dude, I'm scared to wear them still. I've got 2 like best friend weddings in the span of a month coming up. One is this Saturday, and then the other is the second weekend of October in Charlotte. So I think for the first time, I'm going to break out the 2022 ring. I have yet to wear it at like a full-on social function. So a little nervous about that, but had a great year. Broadcast-wise, I mean, first of all, got to give credit to my guy, Max Toma, my broadcast partner, who is a stud, future great in this business, no matter what he does. Chris Hagstrom, Kaylee Sedlacek, Joe Hart, Nick Brown, everybody who do an amazing job at the South Bend Cubs. Of course, team owner Andrew Berlin, and I'm just lucky to be part of it. But feel good, man. It was a great year broadcasting, and guys talk about their stuff at the end of the year. And when it comes to my stuff, I really feel like I took a big jump this year in the booth, and I hope everybody enjoyed listening to it.
You and Max are always one of the best. I mean, I say it all the time that we're blessed in the Cubs system to have just a system full of awesome broadcasters, but the chemistry you and Max have is always awesome. The ring thing, I got to go back to the ring thing. I feel like you have to like pick and choose when you're wearing. Like you can't just wear a championship ring out like for kicks and gigs. Like you got to be wearing it when you're like looking fly, like at a wedding. Like that's an appropriate time to do it.
If I'm going to get a car wash, I'm not putting the ring on. If I'm going to Target, I'm not putting the ring on. But also the thing about the ring is that it's a conversation starter, which is all championship rings, but specifically ours, they were modeled off of the World Series ring, both of them.
True.
And, both rings are fantastic. 2019, of course, the first South Bend championship as a Cubs affiliate, so that's a big deal. And then doing it again in 2022, 2 and 3 seasons, you got to one-up yourself, right? So both rings are fantastic. And yeah, like I said, the 2019 ring, it has been worn and it has been debuted, but I think the 2022 ring now has to have its moment. And it's definitely a conversation starter. You go up to the open bar, you put your tip out, you grab your drink, and somebody's going to ask about it. So you just got to be ready.
Although, dude, you're gonna have to tip a whole lot better if you're rocking that thing up to the
that's
bar.
true. That's true. Here's actually a great tip for you about wedding open bars, and you know this as a married man, is that when you go to the wedding open bar, you make sure that your first tip of the night is your best tip of the night. That way, you show the bartender that, hey,
I'm not.
Remember this face. Remember me. Remember me at 11:30 p.m. when I come up with 6 other people and I'm asking for 12 shots. Right. So
I mean, you and I, like we're the age where we're going to I don't know about you, but I'm going to a whole lot of weddings right now. So you got to have the strategies down. You got to have those strategies set in place. Yeah, it's one of those strategies for sure.
That's my best pro tip for anybody out there listening. First tip, best tip of the night. Make sure they remember your face.
All right. Well, I know we remember your voice, so we can remember your face. So, all right, man, let's get into
Yeah, true.
some South Bend stuff. So, we're gonna get into the South Bend stuff. Sorry, we're gonna get into some team MVP, some Cy Young, some reliever of the year, just stuff like that eventually. But I said two news and notes things. The first of which is the PCA promotion up to Chicago, which we have to dig into. It's kind of funny that Brian and I recorded last week's episode. Typically, we record on Monday nights. We're sitting here recording this on Monday night, me and BK. And Brian and I typically also record on Monday nights. And for some reason, last week we due to some scheduling, we had to record on Sunday night, which of course means that the PCA news dropped on Monday morning. So we could not talk about it on last week's podcast. So at this point, he's been up for a full week. It was one of those things that we saw coming from a mile away. Really, like with the PCA promotion last offseason, it was kind of on our radar as to like this time frame is like, all right, he's going to start the year in AA Tennessee. You got to see him last year in South Bend, and he's going to be on track for that September call-up. And that's exactly what we saw. Now, how much he's been used is a different question. We'll get into that in a second. But what was it like to see PCA make his way up to the big leagues?
Euphoria is kind of the word that comes to mind, because I've had guys that have made the big leagues before, and it's very lucky for me to be a long list already of guys my first couple of years in South Bend that are already up there. I mean, Miguel Maya is a great example. You know, Nelson Velasquez was a great example too. But it just felt different with Pete. And that's an easy thing to say no matter what you're answering about him, because it just comes so easy to the guy. And like you said, we'll talk about, you know, his first week, but just the process of getting up and showing that he can do it as a guy that it was documented on Marquee, youngest Cub since Addison Russell in 2015. That's a big deal, man. That is a big deal, because that just sets the pace now and kind of sets the precedent that the Cubs are willing to do this with a guy that maybe would have benefited from those ABs at AAA in Iowa in September, but is just going to benefit more no matter what happens of just being on this stretch run. It's kind of like a college basketball team in March that needs to learn how to win. Like 1 year, they might get knocked out in the Sweet 16 and they might struggle a little bit, but they're going to come back the next year and people are going to be like, hey, these guys made the Sweet 16 last year. They got the same team. They're about to go make a run to the Final Four. No matter what Pete does over the next 2 weeks, he's going to come back next April and he's going to be like, I played with Cody Bellinger. I played with Ian Happ. I played with Seiya Suzuki. I'm one of these dudes now because I got this experience. And that all goes back to what he did in the minor leagues, man. Greg, like you and I have talked about this before. I'll say it publicly. I'll say it on air. I'll say it in private. He's the best player I've ever covered. He's the best player I've ever worked with. And that I will say that as a player and as a dude. The guy just gets it. He knows what is expected of him. And maybe that goes back to the Hollywood experience and having the parents that he does. But the guy gets it. And I had so much fun working with him. The catches, the big home runs, the monster base hits, the championship, celebrating together, seeing that side of him as just kind of a kid that is breaking out of his shell. Because remember, when he won the championship last year, and pretty hard to believe, we're recording this on September 18th. We are 3 days away from the 1 year anniversary of Pete Crow-Armstrong winning a championship at High A, and he's just made his big league debut. Yeah. I think that should tell you everything you need to know.
That's why I think that Pete is a strange, I mean, you'd know better than me, but I think that he is a strange combination of just wild and electric in the best way,
yeah,
paired with totally under control of what he's doing. You know what I mean? Like it's you don't see that a whole lot, that combination. We're like, he's on the field and he's running around like a madman. He's in center field, like running into walls. He's taking 3 extra bases. Like he's doing crazy things on the field. It's like running around with like his hair on fire. But at the same time, it's like this dude is big league. Like the way like he knows what the hell he's doing, you know?
I had my uncle before he passed away. He had 2 dogs. One of the dogs' names, it was this playful golden retriever. His name was Montana. and I took it on a walk once with him, and Montana like ran into the forest preserve. I was like, Uncle Dan, like, what's going on? He goes, oh, she'll be fine. She'll come back. She'll come back. Like, she knows what she's doing. Kind of like Pete and center. Like, what this guy is risking injury, but all of us are like, people that are watching Pete for the first time are probably like, this kid's gonna get himself killed. But we're like, oh no, he'll come. He knows where he's going. He's coming back. He's gonna get to that ball. Don't worry. So yeah, I think that's the benefit of watching him, and people like you covering him, people like me traveling with him and calling his games. Of that catch that he made in Colorado, the second catch, the one in right center after the one in left center, which was equally as great. But the one in right center, somebody in their living room in the Chicago suburbs was watching him for the first time ever and was like, "Oh my God, he's gonna get himself killed. You're gonna shoot your eye out, kid." Like Christmas story stuff. But all of us are like, it work. And I loved his post game too, where he said, "I have dreamt of making those catches." But he didn't just say that. He said, "Now I know I can make those catches. Yeah. I had envisioned myself and dreamt of doing that, and now I expect myself to do that." Again, the guy's just a gamer.
And I think that real quick, let's touch on how we've seen him in action at the big league level. This is not a big league podcast, but we're not going to be able to talk about PCA on this prospect podcast much longer, I'd imagine. Kind of like the Jordan Wicks scenario, where he's up there, man. I have full confidence in him being up in Chicago. He came up and like you mentioned, he made a couple incredible catches in his first start over in Colorado. And it's one of those things where I was texting Brendan Miller, and I go, hey, not a doubt in my mind that he is going to make an incredible catch in his first outing with the big league team. It's just the ball just finds him in that way. He just finds the big play. And so we've seen him already showing off the glove out in center field. Obviously, I think he's 0 for 8 in his first week at the plate, struggling a little bit there. But also we talked, I'm glad that on this show we talked about expectations for PCA when he makes it up to the big leagues, and that we don't need him to be showing out at the plate. We don't need him to be putting up an 850 OPS at the plate during this short stint. We know what he is in terms of a team that needs a guy for a playoff run in terms of the defense and the base running and the speed and all that good stuff, And I'm glad that we kind of set that standard on the show before he made this call up to the big leagues, because anything you get to the plate, any type of consistent playing time that he gets is just icing on the cake to me.
Same here. And he's going to learn his way because he's got the right people around him. He is literally playing the outfield with his childhood idol. When you come right into the big leagues, I couldn't imagine that. I mean, I'm lucky enough to know and to have learned from the great Pat Hughes, but if you put me in the booth right now with Pat, I'm gonna struggle, man. I'm gonna be starstruck, right? But he's hanging out in the dugout with Cody Bellinger. It's hey man, you're my high school idol, but here we are in the same clubhouse. I think stuff with him is kind of like what we just talked about of people watching him for the first time. I loved the reactions from Pat and Rick Sutcliffe in the booth in Colorado, because Sut brought up that he had conversations with Doug DeCenzo, of course, the outfield and base running coordinator. And DeCenzo was like, Sut, this is the best outfielder I've ever seen. And then Sut made the comment, he's oh, yeah, right. Yeah. So there you go, Sut. And then it was watching somebody's just eyes enlighten when those catches were made. And kind of the same thing with Pat. It was Pat's a Hall of Famer, and he doesn't need to get into the prospects. That's not his job. His job is to cover the Chicago Cubs. I remember the first reel I ever sent Pat, it ended with me interviewing Justin Steele. And it's just kind of funny to look back on that now, because that might have been the first time Pat had ever heard of Justin Steele. Kind of with PCA, of his job is not to know PCA the prospect. His job is to now know PCA the big leaguer. But him seeing those catches, again, it's just everything that he is doing right now, no matter if he goes 0 for 4, is just setting himself up for further success in April. This, as you said, this is not about him coming to take the Cubs to the National League Championship Series. And at times I think, and we've talked about this before, Greg, at times I think baseball can get a little overwhelming when you see guys like Ellie De La Cruz and the kid on the Angels and other new prospects come up and kind of just light the world on fire. Well, Ellie struggled a little bit. The Angels are a dumpster fire now. Great story there, but they're struggling. So I don't know, and maybe it's because people have like a NBA or football mentality of like, if you're a first round pick in football, you're probably going to go and you're going to find success. I mean, hell, like Anthony Richardson before he got a concussion with the Colts. I mean, 2 rushing touchdowns, guys lighting the world on fire. CJ Stroud looked really good on Sunday. Football is not baseball when it comes to these first round picks and top prospects. It is just different. And that's one of the things that's hard to explain to the novice sports fan at times. It is really hard to explain because if I'm a novice sports fan, I'm saying, okay, so this sport, these 22-year-old kids are doing this. Why can't they do it in this sport?
Yeah.
And your only answer is that it's different. And there is no other answer that you could give because it's way too hard to explain.
I think that Bobby Witt is a good example of that, right? Where like he was the top prospect in all of baseball as he was coming up. And I remember watching Bobby Witt play against the Iowa Cubs when he was in AAA, and just thinking that this kid is absolutely absurd. Like he's ridiculous. And everybody thought that as he came up, and then he struggled immediately once he reached the big leagues. Not even like in an awful. I mean, he was rough in a lot of ways, but it's like everyone jumped off the bandwagon. Bobby Witt's not good. Bobby Witt's not good. And now look at him this year, right? And it's like this kid is unbelievable. It just takes a little bit of time. Sometimes it's just 1 year, apparently, for a guy like Bobby Witt. We'll see what PCA is like next year. Give him plenty of time. Give him time because the dude is electric. We know from watching him over the past couple of years. So. All right, let's transition into one more bit of news here. The Arizona Fall League participants for the Cubs were reported by Megan Montemuro. The Cubs have 8 players here. Sorry, 8 players here that they are sending to the Arizona Fall League. We've kind of been waiting on this. There's been rumors. I know that Tommy Birch over the Des Moines Register had reported Alexander Canario as one of the guys that would be in the Arizona Fall League, and he is one of those guys. The other players are Kevin Alcantara, James Triantos, and Alexander Canario. Those are the 3 bats. As far as pitchers go, it is Nick Hull, Tyler Santana, Adam Lasky, Chris Kachmar, and Jose Romero. So we're not going to go into detail on all these guys, right? We're not going to. There's too many guys to go through here. We got plenty to cover as far as the South Bend Cubs go. But I just wanted to point out those players because obviously this is always a big league. In terms of the players there, the hitters you'll notice they're bigger names. You'll recognize those names a whole lot more. And the pitchers, but we've seen that in years past too with the guys that have been sent down to the Arizona Fall League. Bigger names for hitters, guys that they're just trying to make sure are truly could make an impact in Chicago one day as far as pitchers go. You've seen almost all of these guys. In South Bend. What player stands out to you the most from that grouping?
Yeah, and like we were talking off the air, the only guy I've never seen is Romero from Myrtle Beach, and I'm sure he will soon be a South Bend Cub. But yeah, I mean, to go into a couple of the hitters, I think just a quick note on Kevin Alcantara is that he was going so well before he got hurt. And unfortunately, it was an injury where he got put on the injured list, but that was kind of more because he went to Arizona. Like he kept on working out and hitting through it. I mean, you saw it, I believe.
Yeah.
In Peoria, right?
It was the week before Peoria that he got hurt, right? Or was it in Peoria?
Yeah, and then no, it was a week before Peoria, but you watched him take BP in Peoria. We were standing on the on-deck circle together, and he hit like nuke dead center, and I turned to you, I'm like,
with just arms. It was with just arms because he wasn't swinging with his lower half.
Dude, I'm so glad you remember that story because that was absurdity from this guy. So he was going so well. He had a 23 game on base streak. So he comes back from the lower body thing, and then he puts together a 15 game on base streak to end the year. So this guy is just going to benefit from playing more baseball. I don't think I ever had a moment with him where I said he looks tired.
Yeah.
Which to me, like love these guys to death, but with Brennan and Cole in 2019, there came points in that season where they looked a little tired, and I think they would say the same thing. But it has benefited them in the long run. But Alcantara is like it's like Terminator. Like this dude doesn't sway, and it was him getting a freak accident injury that kept him off the field. If not, he'd play the whole year. Man, like we'll talk about some of our favorite moments in South Bend a little bit later, I know, but like he just had some just monster shots this year.
Some monster shots and some big time moments too.
Some big time moments. And then, another guy on that list, Canario, literally 10 months ago, this guy's ankle was shredded to pieces.
And shoulder.
And he also, and shoulder.
Yeah.
But I could you imagine that? Like you rip your shoulder apart, but your ankle is also like
the worst of the two injuries, right? Like,
exactly.
Shoulder, you can't like move your shoulder, but you're like, oh, that's nothing compared to what I did to my ankle. Yeah.
So 10 months later, this guy's in the big leagues. We saw him at CubsCon. He came in the back room with his little daughter and his girlfriend, maybe fiance now. A big boot, obviously, on the ankle, but he asked how he's feeling. I feel good. And this is a month after this guy tears his body up.
Yeah.
And then he comes to South Bend mid-season to rehab, started in Beloit. And I remember talking with our hitting coach, Dan Puente, of, Dan, like, what do you think he can do? And Dan was like, this is spring training for him. Watch. He's gonna get back his timing, and this guy's about to go off. So he spends 2 weeks with us. Luckily, got to do an on-field interview with him. That was a special part of the summer. Stole him for an interview on the night he didn't play.
Yeah.
And his English is superb as well. So that has really come along, and he's a great communicator. And but I think more than anything, not only did the time in South Bend benefit him, it did wonders for Kevin.
Yeah.
To have a guy that's slightly older than him, similar style profile, big arm, pretty good outfielder, comparable players. And maybe it comes someday where those two guys are playing next to each other at Wrigley. But I think if this is even possible, the time in South Bend for Canario helped Alcantara as much as it did him. And now they're going to the fall league together.
I love that. I think that all three of these hitters, Kevin Alcantara, Alexander Canario, and James Triantos, all three guys are prime examples of guys that have been sent in past years to the Arizona Fall League. They all three missed time with injury this year. Varying times, right? Triantos and Canario got late starts to the year. Alcantara missed time in the middle of the year. But all three get great examples. Canario is more advanced of a hitter than what you typically see in the Arizona Fall League. But
he's gonna mash.
He's gonna
absolutely mash. Yeah.
If there's betting odds on AFL MVP, I'd probably put some money down on Alexander Canario there. But Kevin Alcantara and James Triantos, I think, are in very similar situations as to what we saw with Owen Casey in the Arizona Fall League last year, right? Where they're both young dudes who spent. I mean, I know that both Triantos and Alcantara are getting some time up in Double-A this year for the playoff run, but spend their time in High A like Owen Casey did last year. Are going to the Arizona Fall League with the idea that they'll be in Double-A to start next year. And especially with Kevin Alcantara, who's already on the 40-man roster, like who knows when we might see him in Chicago next year. I always make the comment, it's like if a guy's on the 40-man roster and in Double-A, it's just one hot streak away from seeing him in Chicago. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't need that necessarily need that time in AAA. So especially when you're on the 40-man.
Chris Morel is a great example. I mean, we've seen it happen before, and it could definitely happen again. When it comes to the pitchers, though, I did want to bring up two guys. First of which, Tyler Santana. He's not going to show up on a Midwest League All-Star team, but that dude is a Swiss Army knife of nastiness.
Yeah.
Started the year as a long reliever. Midway through the year, kind of became a bit of a closer because the bullpen needed a little help closing a little bit. And then after there was some movement in the rotation, guy becomes a starter and just finishes his year in the rotation. He had a superb month of August, won 3 straight starts, and he brought it, man. And talking with Clayton Mortensen, our pitching coach, Morty, I was playing golf with him one morning. I was like, Morty, what kind of, because he was pitching that, and I was like, what's he doing so well? He's just doing exactly what he did last year in Myrtle because he was our most reliable pitcher there.
in the same role, in
more
a lot of the same
in
role
the
last
same.
year.
Absolutely. I have so much respect for somebody at our level that can play, Frogger going between the rotation and the bullpen and doing things so efficiently. So I think that's a name to watch. And then two, Adam Lasky is a guy that won the championship with us last year, played nearly all the season with us this year, had a quick cup of coffee at Double A. It got sent down back to us at the end of the year, pitched a couple times. I think his slider is one of the most underrated pitches in the system. He has been encouraged to throw it more as he's gotten older and as it has gotten nastier. I mean, that's really a pitch that has developed for him over the years. He's not a crazy hard thrower, but he's your classic lefty. And a guy that comes to mind, just reminds me so much, is Brian Dunsing. Dunsing got so many crucial outs for that 2017 team.
Yep.
And it's not like he was overpowering guys. He was just getting outs.
He was getting outs.
And to me, that's what Alasky can be. And I think the Arizona Fall League experience will be great because Sheldon Reed went there last year. His stuff really developed. And, he did spend the year with us this year, but I would highly anticipate that Sheldon Reed is going to be a Tennessee Smoky in 2024. But kind of the same thing for Lasky. If that slider continues to make way, I think Brian Dunsing is a great comp. And plus, he is like the most diehard Duke Blue Devil fan ever because he's kind of the forgotten Duke guy. He's teammates with Merv. Obviously, Stroh is a big Duke guy too. Lasky's that third Duke fella that's a bit forgotten about. And of course, Jimmy Herron was once a Duke Blue Devil too in his time with the Cubs. Oregon, I know he's at AAA with the Rockies, and he's doing well. So the Cubs have definitely liked their Duke Blue Devils.
They have. I believe when I interviewed Frankie Scalzo over there in Peoria, I put that on the show, on the podcast here, but I believe that he specifically called out Adam Lasky as a guy to kind of keep an eye on. And I think it makes sense. I think that Frankie Scalzo actually matches up a little bit with Tyler Santana and what we've seen with him, right? A guy that's used as a Swiss Army knife. Frankie Scalzo not quite as extreme as what Tyler Santana has been used. But it's also one of those things where like maybe Tyler Santana next year kind of falls into a little bit more consistent of a role and the stuff starts to play up a little bit with that consistency. That's something that can always happen. So I think that if you look across the board, all these players, Jose Romero is a little bit different, but all the other players are guys that I'm not entirely surprised to see making this trip down to the Arizona Fall League. I think it makes sense, whether it's the position players who are making up for lost time or the whole Santana, Lasky, and Kachmar, that like the Cubs are just trying to notch up to that next level and get ready for the upper levels of the minors next year, which is super, super important for them, especially for some of these guys and really all of these guys that are older for the level that they've spent time at. You know what I mean?
What an opportunity for Chris Kachmar, 2022 Midwest League champ. He was on that roster. And, he's an older guy that I think is kind of getting a second life at baseball almost because he was out, years worth due to injury. And it's a crucial opportunity for him. So I think it's kind of a tale of two situations where, the Alcantaras, the Canarios, and the Triantos of the world are just going to keep playing baseball. Kachmar, I'm rooting for the guy. He is revitalizing his baseball career. And if he finds some success in the desert and he gets an opportunity next year with Tennessee and comes out and shoves, I think he won Southern League Pitcher of the Week at one point this year too.
I think he did, yeah.
So that's a guy I'm rooting for, no doubt.
You want to move on to some South Bend Cubs recap since we were already talking about a whole bunch of South Bend Cubs here?
Let's do it.
All right, man. So I got some categories. We're I'm gonna try to get me, Brian, and Greg Zumak on an episode here once the season fully does come to an end here in the next couple of weeks. And what we'll do is we'll kind of run through some full-blown system-wide awards. And so this won't really be an award show, but I want to get your thoughts on some players here. And I think we'll start off with the team MVP because there's a lot of good options to choose from, especially with the bat. We're going to get into some Cy Young and some reliever of the year. So we'll stick to the position player side of things here with the team MVP, which is normal, obviously. But dude, I mean, like a lot of dudes to choose from here. I was looking at the roster, and there's several guys that played a lot of games, and naturally you go to guys that spent a majority of the year in South Bend. And as far as like guys that had played like 60 plus games, there's a lot of dudes that played for South Bend this year. I'll kick it to you first. I want to get your thoughts on who you think the team MVP for South Bend Cubs was this year.
Wow, what a setup. This is a big decision here. I wanted this to be a game time decision. I wrote a couple names down before. I think you can very easily go to James Triantos, who had just a minuscule strikeout rate, had nearly as many walks as strikeouts, and bat to ball skills, contact, one of the best. I mean, Alcantara spent the year in South Bend and, struggled in April, as many guys do, and really rallied back. But, I'm going to go with a guy, Greg, that got there at the end of April and just absolutely mashed. Ezekiel Pagan is going to be my South Bend Cubs team MVP
I love that
2023.
Answer, I love that.
Yeah, man. Listen, I don't know how you can not go with the guy that showed up when it was freezing, had a walk-off hit when it was freezing. It was on a Tuesday in April. Place was just, there were icicles coming down from the broadcast booth that night. Guy ends the game on a walk-off, and everybody goes home happy. But not just that. He hit 400 for a month. And then when he wasn't hitting 400, he hit 350 for about a month. And then when he wasn't hitting 350, he hung in the 320s like June, July, August. Consistency fell a little bit towards the end, still finished the year batting 301.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a guy that played nearly a full Midwest League season. He missed it a full Midwest League year by 2 weeks. He hit 301. That was second in the league, but among active players to finish the year in the Midwest League, top batting average. The only guy that was higher than him, Daniel Susak from Oakland. He went to Double-A to end the year with Oakland. So if you're talking about guys to actually finish the final day of the Midwest League season, there was no better hitter than Ezekiel Pagan. And a guy that just set the table at the top of the lineup, Greg. I mean, listen, that series we were in Peoria started 4 or 6 games with a base hit. The best nights for the South Bend Cubs in 2023 featured leadoff hits from Ezekiel Pagan or just getting on base. And usually, if he got on to begin a first inning, odds are we were going to be up 1-0 by the inning was over.
He is the prototype for a leadoff guy, right? Like that, like when you picture the traditional non-Kyle Schwarber type of leadoff guy, like you're picturing Ezekiel Pagan,
Very much Dexter Fowler. Very much so. Yeah.
I've been waiting for him to get the call up to Tennessee basically from mid-season. He never got that, but he kept on chugging along, dude. I think that he shows off enough power at the level that he's at, right? He shows off enough power to be dangerous in that respect. And I think I know he's a really good athlete. I think that there's some ways that he can improve his outfield defense, but the athleticism and the speed is there. So like that's one of those things where I don't doubt that outfield defense can get better and better as he continues to climb the ladder. Man, next year is that big test for Pagan, right? Like going up to the upper levels of the minors, that's going to be huge for him because we've seen the Darius Hills. I've for the last 2 years got those Darius Hill, Ezekiel Pagan comparisons, and I've always kind of gone the route of like really liking the athleticism and that sneaky extra little bit of pop that Ezekiel Pagan might have over Darius Hill, but like that's a sneaky slope to fall down, right? Like it's being a guy that like thrives off of contact skills that can't quite play center field. I'm really excited to see him next year. I'm very excited to see how he works this offseason because I think he can come back next year, dude, and be that leadoff guy for Double-A Tennessee and just be as fun as he was in South Bend. Because I love me some Ezekiel Pagan. So I'm glad you went with him. Because I had him on my list and I wasn't gonna go with him. But I'm glad you did. I'm going to go with Kevin Alcantara here. And I think that might be the easy answer. But I'm looking back on what he did in April and how much he struggled. Like absolutely struggled. And we've talked about it on this podcast a lot in terms of him falling off those top 100 lists after a rough 6 weeks in cold South Bend and how ridiculous that was. But with that being said, the way that he did not get down on himself and continue to struggle throughout the year is incredibly impressive, right? Like, because it's one thing to struggle because of the weather. It's one thing to struggle because you're just on a rough stretch, but it's another thing to start off the year that way and then flip the script and get back to
Mm-hmm.
succeeding in the way that he was. And to finish with an OPS over 800. He finished with an 807 OPS in South Bend. And it's like, that is not normal, dude. Like, this dude's a freak athlete, a freak at the plate. We know he is. But he's my team MVP this year for South Bend.
It's a great pick. I think what impressed me most, and we've talked a little bit about him, so I'll make it short. But what impressed me most is especially how his patience got better. And he had 12 walks in the month of July alone. That nearly matched the first half total. So the guy in a month in July rallied back with a level of patience that we just didn't see. I mean, we were in our game notes. The headline was "A Patient Jaguar," and that's really what he became. He became a patient Jaguar. And he actually had a great answer. I interviewed him for a game program story. And I said, you just had a July where you became your most patient that you've ever been in your career. He goes, where did that come from? And he said, obviously, it's getting more comfortable and it's understanding the pitching. But his English, man, he graduated from the English as a second language program. And he said the ESL program helped him become a more patient hitter because it allowed him to learn the English language, and it was a struggle, but he was patient with it, and he grinded away at it. And the ESL program, partly, again, we'll see how much, made Kevin Alcantara, gave him a better eye at the plate.
That's incredible. I love that so much, dude. That's a cool story. That's wild. I would never have like that. That's something you can't possibly scout. That's not something you can't, like, whether you're scouting the scout line or out on the field. Baseball's a wild sport, dude.
I know. And, all right, man. He's great. He's great, man. You could have 30-minute conversations with him. Like, he is amazing.
That's cool. That's cool. All right, let's move on to Team Cy Young. Because there were, so again, with the kind of the number of games for hitters was the first thing I looked at when looking at the South Bend stats, because the thing is, it's really tough for these awards, right? It's tough with the team MVP and Cy Young because they're shifting throughout the system, right? You get a guy that starts off the year in South Bend but doesn't finish the year in South Bend. It starts the year in Myrtle Beach, but he does end in South. Like, it's weird. So I kind of started with looking at guys who had 10 plus starts during their time in South Bend, and those guys, there's 6 guys: Connor Noland, Brandon Birdsell, Luis Devers, Richard Gallardo, Michael Arias, and Cade Horton. And I think that naturally I was thinking, like, Cade Horton is the team Cy Young for sure. And we just saw him. It was announced this week, actually, that Cade Horton is one of the 3 finalists for minor league baseball pitcher of the year award. They're having a whole show on MLB Network dedicated to an award show. He's one of the finalists. And I think that in looking at his numbers, you could absolutely give it to him. He didn't spend all that long in South Bend, so I think I'm going to give it to somebody else. I'm going to go ahead and give it to Brandon Birdsell, who was also incredible during his time in South Bend. Like, he was and he did it for a longer period of time, right? He finished with a 2.36 ERA. He had a 1.06 WHIP. He wasn't striking out guys like we saw Cade Horton strike out guys this year, but Brandon Birdsell does not walk dudes ever, it feels like. And he just went out there, and at South Bend, he was just at a level where he was clearly better than the competition he was going up against. And Cade Horton was that way as well. But Brandon Birdsell, coming from Texas Tech, coming from a Big 12 school where he just shoved during his time in college, that translated well to high A, where he's facing guys that just looked overmatched at the plate against them. Obviously, I've talked about the way he throws the ball and how he hides the ball super, super well. The stuff is good, all that good stuff. But I'll go back to the very first start. I think it was his very first start of the year. Or was it? It was. I went over and watched him pitch. I think it was when he was over in the Quad Cities, and I went and watched him pitch. And when he was throwing his bullpen, it was an absolutely brutal bullpen. It was awful before the game. I think he might have even cut it short. I don't know, but it was really, really bad bullpen. And he went out and absolutely shoved in his first outing. He's just a dude that just competes. He put up good numbers. That's why he's the Cy Young for me.
Great pick. I mean, you are Lee Corsoing this right now. You are a great pick. There are not so fast. No, I'm not going to say not so fast. I'll fill in the gaps there for you. I mean, that was Easter Sunday. I remember you being in the Quad Cities. I think you came on for an inning. And I'll never forget that outing either. His pro debut, 3 hitless, scoreless innings. Frankie Scalzo Jr.'s season debut was the same day. He went 3 hitless innings before giving up a knock. So, yeah, that pitching performance that day was incredible. What you talk about with Cade, for sure, I think he very much deserves this award, but I'm going to go a little off the beaten path as well. I'm going to take the first guy that you said. I'm going to take Connor Noland with my pick. Now, I think you'll look at the record. You might look at the ERA and you say, that's not Cy Young worthy. But you got to look at the advanced numbers for this guy. The fact that he spent all year in South Bend, he missed 0 starts. He went out there every 5th or 6th day, and that guy just 8 innings, man.
Workhorse, dude.
Add that to pro debut, opening night, cold day, South Bend. Goes out there, 4 innings, a run, 7 Ks in your first ever pro start. Something he was very used to at the University of Arkansas, where people that are listening may not know, he was QB1 for 3 weeks his freshman year. He was the quarterback for the University of Arkansas Razorbacks his freshman year as a 2-sport athlete.
Dude, wouldn't it be nice
against
to be
Tulsa.
that good of an athlete that you could do that?
No, you know how it goes. Like, guys are out here throwing the pigskin before their bullpens, and they're just screwing around. So, like, here's Lasky and Reed, like Clemson and Duke guys just tossing around the pigskin. Then Nolan grabs it. This guy's throwing perfect spirals to the video board. And you're like, what?
Did his teammates know? Like, did his teammates know that he was a quarterback?
I think mostly everybody knew. I mean, Cole Franklin definitely knew because he's a psychopath of college football. Yeah. But even though he's a Sooner guy, not a Razorback guy. But I mean, also think about it too. It was the South Bend Razorbacks to begin the year with Nolan and Casey Opitz and Christian Franklin, and obviously more on the way now. But I mean, just back to Connor he's got the athleticism of a QB1 college quarterback, but I think his control is so pinpoint. And, there were times this year where he definitely deserved more than 1 win. He pitched well enough to win probably 5 or 6 ball games. And, that happens in baseball sometimes. But I will say, finished the year among AAA, AA, and single A pitchers, the lowest walk rate among AAA, AA, and single A pitchers in the Cubs org, and also the highest ground ball rate. So you knew he was getting outs. He was finding the zone. But it was just a little unlucky at times. But I don't take into account the unluckiness at all. I watched and called every single one of his starts, and I think he deserves it.
I think it's a good call. Yeah. I mean, between Connor Noland and between those 3 guys that we've kind of mentioned here, Connor Noland, Brandon Birdsell, and Cade Horton, just they look like starting pitchers. Like, yes. You talk about scouting. They don't even need to throw a pitch. And you look at those 3 guys, like those are some starting pitchers. Like, they're built, they're big dudes. They look like they threw in the Big 12 and the SEC.
Well, plus Connor's got the beard look. He kind of looks like mini Jake, little Jake the Snake Arrieta with the beard. The beard is pretty fierce off of Connor Noland. So I think if he keeps that up, he'll look pretty sharp.
That's a good point. All right, let's go to guys out of the bullpen here. So let's go reliever of the year award. I'll kick it to you first. I think that you probably know what my answer is. So I'll kick it to you here.
I think for the first time we're going to be in agreement, my man. And I'm sure you've got plenty on them. So I'll make a quick pick here and I'll give it to you. But man, the guy that closed out the no-hitter on July the 6th, Mr. Frankie Scalzo Jr. I know he's been a guest on this podcast. Just an all-time chill dude, amazing mustache, better pitcher. Like I said, his first game of the season, that Easter Sunday, piggybacking Birdsell, and kind of similar to Tyler Santana. You brought this up earlier he didn't exactly have a Santana route, but he did start the year pitching long relief. He was pitching 3 or 4 innings in each one of his outings to begin the season. And then he became arguably the best closer in the Midwest League, finished with 8 saves before he got the call up, and just a wipeout slider. I'll never forget him closing out the no-hitter too. He did it with just such confidence and zeal. And it was just a swagger that I don't know if I'd seen from him that season yet. So I think that did wonders for him. And man, he was really, really good. But I'll turn it to you for our boy.
The word that comes to mind for me with Frankie Scalzo is poise. He what some guys walk around the mound and it's like they own the place, And not
Mhm.
that Frankie doesn't have that. It's just he looks like he belongs on the mound wherever he's at. It's like I belong here. I'm totally and completely comfortable with whatever the situation that arises. And we saw that because he was a long reliever, because he was a closer, because he was brought in as a fireman for certain outings and with guys on base. Like just poise, and that's really important for a reliever, obviously. Yeah, I mean, he had a 2.31 ERA during his time in South Bend, a 1.09 WHIP, just the best numbers out of the bullpen. And I think that he passed the eye test and the stats test as far as being the reliever of the year. I'll throw out. We mentioned Adam Lasky earlier as far as a guy that's in the AFL. He deserves mention here as getting a look for reliever of the year because he had a very good year as well. I thought Joe Nahas during his time out of the bullpen in South Bend was good, and he's yet another guy that's been used in a variety of roles during his time in the system. That's not easy, dude. Like he had a 2.14 ERA. The underlying stats not quite as good for Joe Nahas, but dude, you put up a 2.14 ERA over the course of a year. That's a good season, regardless of how you get there.
Dude, I was thinking the same thing because that 2.14, he was not over two until he came back from
Yeah,
Tennessee.
that's a good
He
point.
had his final two outings with us. He left us midseason at 1.99. And among my calculations, that's under two, which is pretty damn good. So, yeah, man, I have the highest level of respect for Joe, not just as a person, but of course he's a new father and great family man. His family is awesome. But I believe he's still only 23 years old too. And the Cubs have gotten pretty good run out of him, as
Yeah.
you talked about, with both being a starter and being a reliever. So, look, man, Greg, he's a guy that every organization needs, and kind of similar to Tyler Santana, a guy that's going to go eat outs in the minor leagues, and they also bring some good stuff to the table. And Joe Nahas is not an org guy. I don't put that on him at all. Like, he is a capable right-handed prospect. But there are going to be guys that are over him naturally because Joe Nahas was not a draft pick; he was a free agent signing. So, but him still being 23, I think that only benefits him.
So I always make jokes with people that's when they're talking about like the prospect nerd in me, right? How I'm just like nerdy talking about prospects. And I always make the joke like, I just spend time talking about the middle relievers on South Bend's roster. It's like, and like we've spent 20 minutes talking about middle relievers on South Bend's roster, which is terrific. But I think that like the reason why we can talk about Adam Lasky and Tyler Santana and Chris Katchmar and Joe Nahas and Sheldon Reed and guys like that is because I have a whole lot of faith in the Cubs pitching development at this point.
Mhm.
And while those guys do very clearly have talents, Frankie Scalzo, I mentioned him, those guys very clearly do have talent. They're not your prototypical like top prospects. Like they're not top 30 prospects in the organization. However, like none of them are. And really some of them aren't even close. However, I really believe that we're just a year away from any of those guys really breaking out in the way that Frankie Scalzo broke out this year to be one of the top relief prospects in the Cubs organization. And with them spending time in South Bend this year, they're going to be in Tennessee next year. It's like, dude, they're not too far off. Would you be surprised if Adam Lasky really takes off? Would you be surprised if Tyler Santana gets converted to a inning reliever and takes off? It's like, no, like I wouldn't be surprised at any of those guys. And part of that's because my faith in them as the player. Part of that is in my faith in seeing the way the Cubs development staff works with these players and pitching coaches specifically like Clayton Mortensen in South Bend, right? Like these guys know
Mhm.
how to work with these pitchers. They know how to get the most out of them and not only get the most out like Clayton Mortensen works with him in with these guys in South Bend, but that what he teaches them sticks with them as they climb the ladder, as they'll be in Tennessee next year. So I think it's important to mention these guys, especially on a podcast entirely dedicated to Cubs prospects, so we can get a little nerdy there.
Dude, I love that. I think you hit the nail on the head with all those guys, and it really just takes one break for all of them, right? I mean, with the way bullpens work, um, you know, it can take one split decision or one strong outing for a guy at Double A to be like, hey, you know what? We're going to send you to Iowa. And if you post some numbers there, you might be up in the Cubs bullpen come June. We've seen that apply. I mean, heck, Luke Little started the year with us this year. I realize Luke Little's a top 30 prospect, but Luke Little has gone from single A player to big league lefty, closing out games in a postseason chase in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
That should tell you everything you need to know.
Exactly. All right, man. I marked off some time here for just any other guys that kind of stood out to you over the course of this year. Obviously, we've thrown out a lot of names here, but I kind of got two different categories. Other guys that kind of stood out, or players that should be getting more love. I think we can kind of combine these into one. Who should we be talking about how good of a season they had, low key?
If we're talking end of the season, aka last 3 months, I'm going with our guy Luis Verdugo, who started at Double A, really struggled, and had to learn a thing or two because Midwest League champion of 2022. Greg, I don't think there is a better third base glove in the Cubs system than Luis Verdugo.
I agree.
He is the best third base glove in the system, any level. Somewhere along the way, the bat faded to start this year, but the glove didn't. So he gets put on the development list, struggled at Double A, goes to Arizona, comes back to us middle of summer. So we see him. Welcome back. It's good to have you. Don't know how long you're going to be here, but we're glad to have you while you're here. We left it at that. So first few games in South Bend, keeps on struggling, and Max and I are kind of looking at each other like, it's just got to happen soon, right? I mean, this is not Luis Verdugo. This guy is a bona fide top 30 prospect that is just not considered that yet. So what's going on? And I don't have an answer for you about what exactly it was, but boy, something clicked. And whatever it was that set him off, this guy closed the year on a 15-game hitting streak. And hold on, I need these actual numbers.
I know, because I was doing the same thing. I was pulling up some numbers. While you're looking those up, I'll tell the story again. I mentioned it on the podcast.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was a comment that I made on the podcast that Brian called me out on. Basically taking credit for Luis Verdugo breaking back out because I had a conversation with Max. It was the second Quad Cities tournament or series of the year. And I was up chatting with Max, and I go, dude, I was like, what's up with Verdugo, man? Like, I want him to break out. Like, it just needs to happen. And in that game, he hit the grand slam in the first inning. I think it was second inning.
Yeah.
And from there on, it was just kind of a breakout the rest of the season for him. So, Luis, you are welcome for just making one offhand comment and breaking you out of your slump. So,
Greg Huss, saving lives. So 15-game hitting streak, 20-game on base. 522 the average. 1,000 was the slugging. 1,593 was the OPS. He had 2 homers, 7 extra base hits, 8 runs, 7 RBIs, 4 walks. All while being the Midwest League Player of the Week. Thanks to Max Toma for putting together this graphic, by the way. And he closed as the Midwest League Player of the Week, and that was his final week of the year. Max and I were talking about if there's one dude that does not want the season to end in early September, it was Luis Verdugo. But listen, man, in all seriousness, whatever he lost, he found. But he started last year slow. He started this year slow, and he ended both years looking like this guy belongs on the top 30. So his duty now is to start 2024 mashing. He's got to jar up whatever he has had over this last month and bring it to the table in April. And if he can do that, Luis Verdugo, to me, he's going to be a top 30 prospect by next summer.
For a guy that's not currently a top 30 prospect, I think I might be most intrigued about his first month of the year next year than any other guy.
Yeah.
Because it's just going to tell a lot, dude. Like he'll be back up in Tennessee, I'm sure. And if he goes through an opening month of the year that looked like the opening month of the year for him this year, you're just going to kind of raise questions, right? It's going to be like, what can he not do it in the upper levels of the minors? And I think if he does what he did this year again, I think it's a fair question to ask. But I'm not looking for him to do what he did at the end of this year necessarily. Just put together, like, because we know the glove is incredible. So it's a lot like what we've seen from Luis Vasquez this year
Yeah.
compared to past years. But it's like, if the dude can just hit a bit, I mean, and it'll need to come a little bit more for Verdugo than Vasquez, obviously, because he's a third baseman and not a shortstop. There's more value in defensive shortstop. But it's like, just hit some, man. Just hit some. It's going to be huge. I want to call out. This is my time to call out Moises Ballesteros,
Nice.
because I mean, he ultimately didn't spend a whole lot of time in South Bend, because he killed it in Myrtle Beach, and then by the time the South Bend season ended, now he's up as a 19-year-old in Double A, which is absolutely absurd that he's playing his age 19 season up in Double A. The dude just looked comfortable as always at the plate up in South Bend.
He did, and actually, just to close on Verdugo, he played
Yeah.
100 games with South Bend last year, about 50 this year. Had more home runs in 50 games with South Bend this year than he did in 100 games last year.
There you go.
So that's something to think about. Ballesteros, boy, that's a sweet swinging lefty. I love watching him swing the bat. It is a show to go down to VP and watch him swing because he has the ability like no other lefty. It's even more impressive than a Yohendrick Pinango, because Pinango is so good at lacing the ball into left. Ballesteros is the same way, and he's 3 years younger. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. And I call it out as I see it on a broadcast. Usually, when it comes to like shifting, teams are still playing the shortstop up the middle against Ballesteros. But he can beat you anytime. But what also is encouraging is that when he first got to South Bend, he struggled, but then he started hitting the ball the other way, and you're like, okay, here we go. His first home run in South Bend was a moonshot over the right center field wall, nearly a video board bomb. It was a bally bomb. It was majestic. And then he just started pulling the ball more and more. He has learned, at least at high A, we'll see what he does at Double A, but he has learned how to really mix himself and keep defenses frustrated as hell, because they're not going to know how to shift on this guy. It's like, he can burn us every day of the week, but he can also just hammer one over the second baseman's head. How do we set up against this guy?
That is one of the more impressive things. Like, there was a lot of impressive things I saw from Ballesteros this year, but that was maybe the most impressive. That, like, we knew down in Myrtle Beach that he could go the opposite way with the best of them. Like, we knew he could pepper that left center gap. But he wasn't like consistently showing that ability to pull the ball in the air. It's like, we talked about it several times on the show, is like, the idea was that like this upcoming offseason is like, oh, like maybe that's when he learns how to pull the ball in the air. Instead, we saw him climb the ladder up to South Bend and now up to Tennessee and learn as he's going to pull the ball in the air more. And that is not normal, dude. Like that's not a normal thing. We saw with Owen Casey, which I've compared the bat of Moises Ballesteros to the bat of Owen Casey in a lot of ways. They're not a 1-for-1 split. Don't get that confused. But like, I think it's a good comparison where we saw Owen Casey as he climbed the ladders, like he put in work over the offseason, especially this past offseason, to really tap into some pull side power. But that wasn't something that came mid-season like we're seeing with Ballesteros. It's absurd. So, I just think that like his time in South Bend was super, super impressive. We were expecting him to kind of drop off a little bit when he made it up to South Bend. You know, it was like, he can't keep doing this, but he just did, dude. He kept performing super, super well. And worth mentioning, if we're talking about a recap of the South Bend season, I think we can't not mention the season of Moises Ballesteros.
I'm with you. And then one more guy I want to throw in too is Christian Franklin and how he went off midsummer after the development list. I know we're a little short on time here, but man, having Justin Stone in the broadcast booth about a month and a half ago, and hearing Stoney publicly say like, this is the most prime example of development list success that we've ever seen. Guy went back to Arizona, clearly probably PO'd that he was on the development list. Fourth round pick, coming off an injury. Again, similar to what Verdugo kind of has to do. Franklin jarred up what he had to, and when Michael Jordan, I take this personally, and just went on a revenge tour in the Midwest League. I mean, there was a stretch where he had bombs on 4 straight days, and he just. I think it was mixed between Peoria too. And then shortly before, just nukes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the power, man. Franklin, Felix Stevens had 14 bombs in South Bend, had 25 or actually 27 total on the year, and it's great. I think this goes back to a point that you just said, Greg. Is Nahas, Lasky, Cashmar, all these guys that we read, they're not top 30 prospects. Christian Franklin only got into the top 30 prospects list at the end of the summer. Felix Stevens is not considered one. So these are legitimate Waveland Avenue power threats that are either barely in that top 30 or just getting in. So, dude, we could go all day talking about you bring up a name, I bring up a name. Oh, hey, remember this guy? They don't want this guy. That's how deep the system is now. And I think this is a comment I said earlier. If somebody is looking at the Cubs system for the first time and they're a novice to it, it should be a top 50 prospect list because there are legitimately 20 other guys that deserve to be on that list. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not sure if we've seen that in the Cubs or what we are now.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I want to get into a couple last couple things here, less having to do with the product on the field and the statistics they put up. I always like to ask you guys, the broadcasters, about like the vibes of some players because you guys are around them a whole lot more, and that's something that we just we don't. I think that the Cubs prospect fan is more well-informed than any other fan base out there. I think that they're more diehard than anybody. It's ridiculous that we get people listening into this podcast and on Twitter about it, on Facebook groups and all these different things. But I think that the one thing that's missing out a lot of times is the vibes of some of these players. And we get to know them a whole lot more, whether it's through videos that are put together by the great production teams through the minor league systems. But it's really once they reach the major leagues, we see that personality more, because they're interviewed every single day and stuff like that. But I'm curious to get your take on some all vibes guys from this season in South Bend.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's hard to one up the all vibes team of 2022 with the catching core, Pablo Aliendo, Caleb Knight, and Casey Opitz. That was just ridiculous. I mean, those guys coming to the park every single day. And plus, you saw it this year when Opie and Nider did the beer commercial in Tennessee, which was just outstanding. Perfect. So hard to follow up, but I think this trio did it. At kind of a duo. Jacob Wetzel and Ethan Hearn went unscripted on a pretzel taste test video. It's currently on the South Bend Cubs socials, at SB Cubs on Instagram. And listen, when you get Ethan Hearn unscripted, magic happens. It is pure magic. It's like watching SNL in the peak days. We told, and Wetzel is a great compliment because Wetsy is kind of like the brains of the operation. Yep. And then Herney's kind of just the wild card of Wetsy kind of went in with a plan. He was like, okay, so we're going to do this one. We're going to do this one. We're going to do this one. Herney throws it away within the first minute. And it was like, you know what? No, I need some sauce. But we weren't supposed to have the sauce until the end. He goes, give me the sauce right now. And it just went completely off the board. Liam Spence is right in there too. That's kind of like the three best friends that anybody can have: Hearn, Spence, and Wetzel. But yeah, that pretzel video is gold. And I mean, basically it's just Jacob Wetzel tasting pretzels with special guest Ethan Hearn, which I loved. Also, I do want to give a shout out to this guy who was with us for a little bit, with us in Peoria. You saw him. Good old lefty Steven Gonsalves, who was all vibes team when he was in South Bend, because of course rehabbing, went through some injury scares, and now he's back at AAA. Happy for him. But I got to do an interview with him on the field. But he was like proud dad to everybody on that team, because he's a year older than me. He's 29. He's been in the big leagues twice. Here he is working with Moises Ballesteros, who's 10 years younger than him. Here he is working with Ethan Hearn. And I asked him, who's the funniest guy in this roster? He goes, I got to go with the Hearn dog. And it's just it's the little it's the little nuances with the inside jokes. And Gonsalves at one point, Lance got tossed one night, so Andrew Reeder, our bullpen coach, had to go coach first. Gonsalves picks up the clipboard in the bullpen. He's bullpen coach because he's not hot that night. That's incredible. That's a great memory, and big shout out to Gonsalves. He was awesome.
Yeah, I think that Hearn has been on our radar in terms of the vibes for a while now, since his time down in Myrtle Beach too. He is definitely a vibes guy for sure. Always a hype man, that's for sure. Is there anybody as far as any other pitchers that are the quirky relievers maybe?
I
mean, Frankie's kind of a little bit.
Yeah, Frankie for sure. I'll tell you who cracks me up, Michael McAveen. I was so glad to see him at the end of the year, and I get kind of the same thing as Verdugo. I know it didn't go well at Double A, and he got put on deval, and it's not ideal for a guy. But Mac came back to South Bend just all positive, like he's team vibe. Like he wears he wears an obvious shirt every day, and it's the ones that were team issued last year. So one of them says PCA greater than you. One of them says Berlin boys, period, for Andrew Berlin's kids, and then one says South Bend does it better, period. And like he just wears that like around the yard, and yeah, I mean I love Mac. He's a diehard Colts fan, so me obviously in the offseason
he's
I
an
covered
Indiana
Colts.
boy. I forgot about that.
Yeah, he part of Ron Colley in Indianapolis, but yeah, I mean him and I vibed last year over the Colts, and like inside jokes this year with like how bad are they going to be, or what's Jonathan Taylor doing now? Like every day at the ballpark when we saw each other over the last 2 months, it was, hey, we have a JT sighting yet? So yeah, I mean he's the best. He's the best.
All right, dude. Last thing here, I want to give you the opportunity. You kind of hinted at it earlier. You had a lot of awesome moments this season. A lot of them. You mentioned the no hitter. I don't know if that'll be your go to here, but your favorite moments of the year. You have one, you can have multiple, but I'm curious to hear what your favorite moments in the booth on the team were.
Also, some of the best moments. I do want to add this. Max Bain's dog, his fiance, would bring his golden doodle Wes to the park, and Wes would just run around the outfield every day before the game and just tire itself out, and obviously it's slept after. So big shout out to Max Bain and his dog. But yeah, I mean those were fun 3-game moments. Yeah, I think you got to go with the no hitter. Max had a legendary call of it. That was just a great night. Fun to interview Frankie at the end. Beautiful night in South Bend. I mean, it was like cotton candy sky. Game flew by. I mean, I'm proud that 3 of my 4 seasons in South Bend there's been a no hitter at home. I mean, that's pretty cool to think about. I mean, Raleigh and Hector and in 2018, and DC, and then Peyton Ramey in 2019. Caratini caught half of that thing. I mean, I'll never forget that. And then now add Arias and Wright and Nooney and Frankie to that, along with Bally catching it. I mean, heck, Bally's a 19-year-old. He's got a no-hitter under his belt. I mean, I think that's just as impressive as the no-hitter itself. I mean, coming out and sweeping Quad Cities to start the season was pretty cool because we kind of picked up right where you left off. From the championship run, you're like, boy, that was great. That was a fun series. I mean, Carlos Guzman was pitching for us. He took a no-hitter with the help of Luke Little into like the 7th inning and game 2 of the season. So that was cool. But really, if there's a particular moment, massive crowd, it's a weekend. We were losing 4-0 to Peoria. Beautiful summer night. Andrew Marrero's pitching for them, who is one of their big relief prospects. Alcantara comes up, bags juice. Canario was on the team because he was in the call. I think Triantos was at 3rd. Anyway, so first of all, I have to preface this with never have seen anybody hit a home run off the batter's iron center on a line drive before this season. Postseason here, you and me talking, we've seen it 3 times. It happened 3 times this year. But the first, Kevin Alcantara's grand slam, just a laser beam. It was like a UFO carrying over the ocean. There was no launch. Well, there was a little launch, but there was virtually no launch. And it just kind of sailed and just nailed the batter's eye. I think from the exit velo, it did not slow down a second. And it goes over the yellow line off the batter's eye in center, tie game 4-4. I had never seen anybody do that. And then a couple weeks later, Felix Stevens does it. And then a week after that, Christian Franklin hit one over the batter's eye. And I've only seen that once. Griffin Conine did that my second year. Had never seen a South Bend Cub do that. So I think the moon shots that we saw to center, but none more dramatic than Kevin Alcantara's game-tying grand slam against Peoria off the batter's eye.
Yeah, I mean, and Alcantara's, like you're right, it was off the bat, like on the broadcast. It looked like it was gonna fall almost in front of the center fielder, and it just kept going, dude. Like it just kept carrying. Because like you can't always tell how hard the ball is hit from the broadcast like view. You know what I mean?
It's tough. It's
And
tough.
like sometimes, especially from to center field, because center field it's coming right at the camera. You can't tell. It looked like it was going to fall in front of the center fielder, and then it was just a line shot off the batter's eye out there. It was wild, but yeah, that was what came to mind for me. Was I figured you're gonna go that route with Alcantara's grand slam, because I think that was just absolutely electric for sure.
Yeah, I think another one too is beating Peoria twice on the same day leading up to the no hitter. Because a story that a lot of people forget is that we finished the suspended game from the night before the no hitter, because the game was banged in the ninth inning. We came back and we had the winning run at second. It was the bottom of the ninth inning. Alcantara comes up. Again, this is during the daytime now. Grounds out to short, we go to extras. And like Max and I and Cody Schindler, the voice of the Chiefs, are just laughing our tails off because like we spent the last 24 hours saying, what's Alcantara going to do? Like, what's he going to come out
with?
Was
it first pitch? Was it first pitch?
Yeah, first pitch grounds out to short.
That's incredible. I forgot that was that game. Yeah.
Yeah, and then in extras, we hold them, and then Ed comes up, and man at third, Ed chops the ball back to the mound. Alcantara comes home and scores on an air. We walk it off, but the guys can't dump the Gatorade on each other because we got to play the next game. So here's Ed just getting like the bubble gum tossed on him and guys jumping all over him. But guys had to be like, no, don't bring out the Gatorade. We got to play in 20 minutes. And then we no-hit Peoria the next game.
So. That's a heck of a day. That's a heck of a day at the ballpark. We'll end with that, actually. That's a good place to end. Because I talked with Max earlier this year about the Gatorade or water, whatever it is, toss at the end of the game. And last year he mentioned it was a lot of Daniel Palencia was kind of the culprit a lot of times last year. But he said that it was kind of a mix of dudes this year. Who was the most common culprit of tossing the Gatorade on the post game interview?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Stevens fell in love with it.
Okay,
because, for a while nobody was doing it. Nobody did it for the first 2 months, which is it happens.
It's freezing too.
Because nobody wants any Gatorade on their face in May. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, Palencia didn't care if it was 2 degrees or 92 degrees. Like you were getting dumped. And I also love the fact that last year it was Jordan Wicks that like held me and forced me to take a red Gatorade shower, and it was Palencia that dumped it. And then in Wixie's home debut, it was Palencia that was tossing the stuff on him. So that was like a match made in heaven. But I think Stevens fell in love with it because we had a win like midsummer and it was June and nobody was still doing it. But which is fair because that doesn't necessarily carry over year by year. But I remember because Chris Hagstrom was on the field because usually Chris is the executive producer of South Bend Cubs baseball. So like he's directing all like the sounds and the clips and stuff that's happening in stadium. Kaylee Sedlicek was doing it that night. So Chris was kind of roving around. So we win and Max is doing the post game and it's a warm night in June and nobody's grabbing the Gatorade. So it's like Felix's second or third day in South Bend. Chris goes up to him and like, you, Gatorade. And Stevens goes with Max, picks it up. And if you ever watch Felix dump the Gatorade, he, like a racehorse, like a Clydesdale, he gallops into it and just lets it loose. And it comes at you. Yeah. Right in your face. Kind of like Pablo did last year. Pablo would sprint to the bullpen, grab it, and then sprint back with the Gatorade as it's falling on his head, but then he'll just dump it all over you. Stevens takes that one big gallop and just launches it on you. So late in the year, it became a Felix Stevens thing. I know Alcantara had a couple, and then Ezekiel Pagan did the last one on Kevin. Kevin was our last interview last Sunday, and Pagan dumped it on Kevin.
I love that dude. And Felix Stevens is a big dude. That's a big dude coming at you with the Gatorade cooler. That's for sure. So all right, man. That was I appreciate you coming on. This is always fun getting you and the boys on the show, especially to recap a fun South Bend season. I'll let you plug yourself. What are you up to this offseason? This South Bend Cubs offseason, I guess.
Yeah, staying busy. So back in Indy, here at 107.5 The Fan, going to be covering the Colts and the Pacers. My podcast is going to come back for another season too, because obviously don't have the time to do it during the season. So This is my invite for you to come on my pod this off season. So would love to have you. You can check it out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever. It's the Brendan King Show. Follow on Twitter at BKingSports. And yeah, man. But other than that, just going to be doing hopefully a lot of college hoops, do some Indiana State, do some Butler, kind of do whoever else calls. But really, it's the off season's about staying fresh, staying busy, but also getting some sleep too. So that's definitely on the list.
Go Dogs! I'm glad you're covering some Thad Matta in the gang, right?
1,000%. Big year for the boys. Big year for the boys.
It is a big year. All right, man. So I appreciate you coming on. If you guys are out there listening, be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube, at Northside Bound on YouTube. Go check us out. Subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. We really appreciate you guys tuning into that. If you're just a podcast listener, that's totally fine too. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, all that good stuff. We really appreciate it. And in the meantime, we'll probably keep doing these kind of season recaps on some of these. We'll get some Sam and Alex on the show for sure to recap those seasons. I don't know what next week looks like for sure. I think Brian will probably be back on, but we'll see. In the meantime, we will be back in your ears in one short week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.